Okay, good evening, everyone. I hope you all can hear us well in this lovely evening here. So a little bit about myself, whilst maybe we'll give about 2 minutes. But my name is Alessandra. So I'm a fungal biologist. So I'm a medical mycologist. Um, so I work at Newcastle University, and I'm part of the FBR committee. So it's the Fungal Biology Research Community at the BMS. And today we're basically going to have a talk by Iona here. Okay. So we'll just wait for about 5 minutes, probably. Is that okay, Iona?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll just wait for another 2, 3 minutes. So people are going to start. Yeah. So we'll have quite a lot of people on the call. That's nice. And we'll shortly start. So basically, what we'll have Iona giving us her talk for about an hour, and then after that hour, uh, we'll have questions. So if you have any questions for Iona, if you can put basically your questions on the chat function. So the Q&A function has been disabled. So if you have any questions for Iona, just write them on the chat, and we'll try to go through as many questions as we can. So I'll start giving a little bit of an intro about Iona before our talk, and you correct me if I'm saying anything wrong or pronouncing anything correctly. So Iona is a field mycologist, and you have a particular love for the shed assemblage.
Checked assemblage. Yeah. So
Yeah,
grassland fungi are something that I've been spending a lot of time with in recent years.
that's great. She has been teaching fungus field. I think we were sat in one of the BMS dinner. So you're a teacher by
Yeah.
training? Are you a teacher?
No. I've worked in all sorts of fields before I got into mycology. Mycology was a hobby initially for me, and it was just a passion that developed into something that people started asking me to teach. So I've been teaching fungus identification in the field, so courses
Yeah.
outdoors, in person, meeting fungi.
Yeah, and you're quite into, and you're learning how now to do DNA sequencing. You do some
That's the
microscopy as
plan,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, microscopy we teach now as well, but the sequencing, the barcoding is very new, and the very lovely Brian Douglas has been patiently going through it and teaching me, but I'm not quite there yet.
Oh, that's amazing. So she's a director of a non-profit organization delivering this mycology education nature engagement with an emphasis of creating community, improving mental health in marginalized communities. So really an amazing work, Donna. That's amazing. So your talk, the title of your talk is Thinking Differently About Fungi, Two-Way Benefits of Neurodiversity in the Mycology Community. And I'm really looking forward to hearing you tonight. Like
Me too.
I'm sure all of our attendees are.
I'm just imagining all the friendly faces now.
Yes, exactly.
So, I've got an introduction written down here, but we have already talked a bit about who I am. I've been doing field mycology, fungi gazing, whatever you want to call it, for about 16 years now. We run surveys, we do field ID, we do all sorts of nature engagement outside of fungi as well. And we formed Petrichor, which is our not-for-profit, together, myself and my two business partners, so that we could put a specific focus on this mental health benefits of nature engagement. Particularly, we're interested in providing those to the neurodivergent community, which is a huge passion. We're all neurodivergent, the directors of Petrichor. And so we have a lot of personal experience of the impact of nature engagement and mycology specifically on our own mental health. So wanted to share that with the community and make it more accessible to people who might not have obvious, easy ways to find that. I think it's really important for mycology as a discipline that we do that as well. Basically, as the title of the talk suggests, it's a really two-way thing. So it's not just that mycology and nature engagement is really good for neurodivergence and for the individuals concerned. Those neurodivergents are really, really good for mycology. So it's important from both perspectives to acknowledge and explore and open up the discussion around that connection that we already know exists. So usually I start by inviting questions throughout the talk. Obviously, we're not going to do that today because I can't see any of you. It's very strange. I feel like I'm giving a talk to my notes. So I'm going to try and keep things flowing. I'm going to try and stick as much as possible to the time frame. I have extensive notes because autistic and I like things to be ordered and structured and planned. I'm also ADHD, so time blind and a bit fly by the seat of my pants. So the whole talk could be tangents. We just won't know until we start. Because it's a special interest, we'll get to that later, of mine, it is something that I can talk about pretty much endlessly. So I'm going to be Alessandra's on hand to reel me in if I start looking like I'm going to go way over time. But hopefully the structure will stay and we'll keep on track. Do write down your questions if you have them, put them in the chat and things like that. But I will also make everything here available if people get hold of me. If you want the slides, if you want my notes, if you want the video I've said that can be recorded, so it'll go on YouTube afterwards. The aim of the game is accessibility. So if you have questions for me afterwards, we'll find a way to make sure that they are answered, even if they don't come to you at the right moment when they're supposed to at the end of the talk. This is quite out of the comfort zone for me. So usually when I'm doing public speaking, I'm talking about identification or microscopy or fungi toxins or something like that, something I've been teaching for a very long time. So a little bit nervous about the departure from what I'm used to. And anyone here who's neurodivergent will know that things that are outside of our comfort zone and new are challenging. But it's a really important subject to me. So I'm hoping that that will keep us going. Let me see where we are. I'm having to use equipment that I've never used before as well. So I'm going to try and keep it as flowy as possible, but do please make allowances for slight tech issues. I'm not a tech person. So what is neurodivergence will be our starting point. I have no idea what the spread of people in the audience is today. Obviously, we could be talking to people who are in field mycology and have been for a long time. We could be talking to brand new people who are interested and are neurodivergent. There's likely to be a big mix. So I'm trying to cover things as broadly as I can and make sure that the pitch is somewhere in the middle. But hopefully we'll cover as much as is useful. Apologies if I'm telling you things that you already know lots about. Neurodivergence is let's go straight to so this is the overview. I've done this so that the neurodivergents in the audience will know what's going to happen, because we like to be able to see ahead of time what's going to be talked about and what the plan is. So that's the plan of what we're going to cover today, assuming I ever stop babbling. But neurodivergence is the subject, the main subject that we're covering here today. And it's a word that gets used wrongly, or other things get used when they mean neurodivergence quite often in conversations. So I wanted to just start by covering a few of the words and what they mean so that we can all be on the same page. definition that I've got from online is up at the top of the slide here. It's divergence in mental or neurological function from what is considered typical or normal, frequently used with reference to autistic spectrum disorders. Autistic spectrum disorders, or ASD, is what the textbooks call autism. Autistic individuals tend to refer to themselves mostly as autistic. Some will say ASD, some would prefer person with autism, but that tends to be quite rare, actually. Autistic is fine. Basically, it's an umbrella term, neurodivergence, for multiple different ways that our brain can be different to what's considered typical. So autism is probably going to be the focus when we're talking about neurodivergence here this evening, but ADHD as well. There's a lot of overlap there, a lot of comorbidity. So some studies, I think, said up to 80% of people with ASD could also have ADHD. There's lots of different numbers floating around, but we know that they're very, very closely related, very tied together, and have a lot of overlap. But that's neurodivergence. Neurodivergent is just the singular of that. So it's if we're talking about one person or one behavior or something singular rather than plural. Neurotypical is, again, the proper definition from online is not displaying or characterized by autistic or other neurologically atypical patterns of thought or behavior, which is basically just means it's the standard or baseline in terms of neurology that is considered typical. So it's what we would use as a yardstick to measure what is atypical or different from typical against. Neurodiverse or neurodiversity are words that people often use when what they mean is neurodivergent. Neurodiverse or neurodiversity, the definition is the range of differences in individual brain function and behavioral traits regarded as part of normal variation in the human population. So it's a broad term that means all of that variation, all of those differences, including neurotypical. So when we use that, firstly, it can only be for a community or a group. It can't be for an individual. An individual is either neurotypical or neurodivergent. But it also includes all of those things. So we're not just talking about autistics and ADHD people and neurodivergent people. When we use neurodiverse, we're talking about everyone, including neurotypicals. The neurodivergent umbrella covers quite a lot of things, and what it covers is different depending on where you look. So it's quite broad, it's open to interpretation, because that original definition of neurodivergent, of anything that is outside what is typical, can be considered to include all sorts of things. When we're talking about it today, as I said, mostly going to be looking at autism and ADHD and things quite close to that. It can include dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, OCD, Tourette's and similar disorders to that, some psychiatric disabilities. All sorts of different things can be considered. And some people would say it was much, much broader than that even. But for the purposes of today, we're mostly going to be talking about the top couple of things on that list. I'm just checking my notes and making sure I haven't missed anything. Yeah, so what we're talking about, I'm mostly referring to the top couple of things on that list. The only thing that I hadn't said is that when I'm talking about that, the chances are that a lot of what I'm saying will still also apply to lots of other types of neurodivergence. And actually, the chances are that if we're talking about adjustments that can be made and adaptations that can be made to make things easier for neurodivergent people, they often just make things better for everyone. That's just part of improving things for one set of people, as it tends to improve things for everybody. So just to be as clear as possible about who we're describing and who we're talking about benefiting. So understanding of neurodivergence, particularly autism and ADHD, is growing all the time. And lots of leaps have been made in recent years in terms of what we know about how it presents. This is an amazing thing, a wonderful thing, as it will hopefully allow more people to access support and understand their own experiences more clearly. That's certainly been true for me. I was diagnosed in my 40s. So had gone through an entire lifetime of experience of being neurodivergent without knowing I was neurodivergent, that's an experience all of its own, and I think is one that quite a lot of people can relate to because we're starting to understand neurodivergence better. We're often finding that people get diagnosed much later. Many neurodivergent adults are undiagnosed still, though, because that is still an ongoing thing, that understanding and that kind of catching up with ourselves societally. It's also either very expensive or very long-winded, and there's a lot of barriers in terms of getting that diagnosis or even getting to that understanding of who we are. So not everybody who is neurodivergent is diagnosed. When we're talking about neurodivergent people, we tend to mean, and I almost always would mean, both people who are diagnosed and people who have self-identified. Because of those barriers, we don't want to exclude a lot of people who are neurodivergent but just haven't been able to get to the point where they have a diagnosis yet. So next slide that I already went to is, what does autism or neurodivergence look like? And I think this is an important one to cover because often we think we have an idea of it, even if it's not what it looks like. We have these kind of societal or these ideas that we've grown up with of what something looks like, and they're basically at heart prejudices. They're just not kind of deliberate, thought out, nasty things. They're just what we've ended up thinking. And they're perpetuated by media, by even the diagnostic criteria and things like that for autism, for ADHD. All of those things and the research and the representations were focused very specifically on a very stereotyped presentation of what those things are. So historically, that was young white boys. And that does a disservice to all of us. Like, small white autistic boys who love geeky things and flap their arms and talk like little professors, and that stereotype do exist. I have one that lives in my house. It's a very real thing, as most stereotypes are, but it's a very, very small proportion of the autistic community. It's a spectrum. We often talk about autism as a spectrum and neurodivergence as a spectrum, and people often think that we mean almost like a measuring meter that goes from not very severe to very severe, and that's not what a spectrum is. So we tend to describe it often more like a light spectrum. So there's all of these different traits and ways that autism can manifest in a person. And for some people, there'll be more of this one and less of that one. And for some people, there'll be more of this one and less of that one. So it's just about it looking different in different people. And because of that, people who differed from that original stereotype were overlooked for a long time, and often still not recognised outside of certain circles. I'm a really good example of that. I don't look autistic to a lot of people. That is more often true for women and feminine presenting people, but it can be true of anyone who doesn't present in the way that society expects autistics to look. Basically, as a society, we are told, or were told, that autism looks like this. We know the film. It gets brought up a lot in autistic circles, because that's the sort of thing I'm talking about with the media presentations and things like that of autism. And actually, it can look like this. This is me. The reality is that it can look like absolutely any one of us. And what that means is that the struggles that come with it can go unnoticed and unsupported for a really long time, because people don't see you and immediately see how difficult certain things are for you because you just look normal to them. Often that can happen until we reach crisis point or burnout or are having a really, really difficult time with mental health. And we know that from statistics and things which we'll cover later. So those traits that make up autism or ADHD or anything that is a spectrum can manifest differently in different people. They're not inherently negative. We talk about autistic traits, or the system talks about autistic traits often as negatives. But the fact that they're seen outside of So the negative often is not from the trait itself, it's from the fact that they're different from what is typical, and therefore the world is not really set up to accommodate them. So it's not that being autistic is a bad thing. And I think it's really important to say that, because we still see people hearing about your autism diagnosis. Oh, I'm so sorry. And actually, a really positive autistic identity is something that we embrace as a community. And even the NHS has got on board recently. My son was diagnosed, and that was in the literature that they gave us to read afterwards. It's definitely becoming more and more accepted that this is just a difference, not a disorder, not a illness. But the reality is that because the world is not adjusted to those differences, it can be much more difficult to participate in. Sorry, trying to swap between screens again. So common traits of, oh, we'll get there eventually. Common traits of neurodivergence, particularly autism, but some of these traits are overlapping. Communication differences. So that can mean people who are not speaking, they might use a device to speak. They might just communicate very differently. We talk about info dumping in the community. So most of us have met an autistic person who, like me, when they're excited about something, will tell you everything about it, even though that wasn't necessarily what you were hoping to have a conversation about. We often are quite direct, and that can be interpreted as being blunt or rude sometimes. It's not usually the intention of autistic people to be rude, but we do tend to say what we mean without kind of thinking about how it would be socially acceptable to say it. So those communication differences, as you can see, just in that one sentence, can manifest in multiple different ways. Sensory processing differences would be another really good example, in that there are lots of ways that that can manifest. We talk about hyposensitivity and hypersensitivity. So often it's two ends of a spectrum in terms of, so some people really, really look for sensory input. We go seeking it. We want strong smells. We want strong tastes. We want to spin round and round and round in circles because that gives us a lot of input. Whereas some people are wearing earplugs and headphones and needing to be in dark rooms. And the reality is that often those come and go and we swing between them, depending on how overwhelmed we are, what's going on in our environment, things like that. Sorry. One day I'll learn how to use all of this technology. So yeah, sensory reactions. Monotropic thought is another autistic trait that covers a few different things, but basically it's that way of thinking where we tend to focus right in on something to the exclusion of other things. And it's often thought of, again, or presented as something really negative. But actually, in a lot of circumstances, it's really, really useful to be able to focus very specifically on one thing and block everything else out and not have to deal with it. Except that when you're expected to be doing other things in a certain way at the same time, that can become an issue. So it's not the trait itself that's the issue, it's trying to fit that trait into a world of expectations. That particularly has relevance for things like special interests. Also, in ADHD, we talk about hyperfocus, which is a bit different from a special interest. It tends to be shorter lived and less of a thing that you are completely engaged with for very long periods of time, but it's that same monotropic kind of super focused in on a specific thing. Social differences are another one that is, it's not that the differences are negative, but because it's a social thing, it's a back and forth with other people, it tends to be often interpreted negatively by neurotypical people because it's them that we are being different from. So that can be differences in eye contact. We all know that some autistic people don't like eye contact, but some of them like a lot of it and will be very eye contacty. And it's that kind of two ends of, or two sides of a coin. Lack of understanding or caring about social constructs, a strong sense of justice. And again, I've seen actual studies where they describe that as a problem. Doesn't seem like a problem to me. It's just a difference. Executive function differences, that is to do with those things that we all do every day, you know, time management, keeping things clean and tidy, organizing our time. Said that already. It's a really good example, trying to manage two different screens and talk without any feedback. That's a lot of functions for my brain to deal with at once. So it's that managing lots of different activities or expectations, or trying to organize our thoughts. All of these things basically can have both positive and negative implications, but either way, if we're trying to fit them into a society that's not set up for them, they can be really overwhelming. That means that mental health is a really, really big concern in the neurodivergent community, because we're dealing with all of that just on top of the normal day-to-day life things. So the responses to that overwhelm, or the responses to the needs not being accommodated, in terms of our mental health, can be overwhelm is the first one, and overwhelm is what tends to lead to what we think of as meltdowns, what we're used to seeing in particularly autistic children, but they happen for autistics of any age, is when you're super overwhelmed and you just can't cope anymore, and it kind of tips you into an overwhelmed state where you can't function. Anxiety disorders and depression are the two most commonly seen comorbidities in terms of mental health with neurodivergence. And burnout is something that we talk about specifically in autism. Autistic burnout is when all of these things kind of pile one on top of the other, and it's basically a whole life overwhelm, a whole life breakdown, and you cease to be able to function normally for a while, and that usually takes quite a long time to come out of. Next, we're going to go to just some statistics. Now, there were so many statistics when I went online to look for these, and some of them were different from each other. It depends on what study you look at. I have chosen the ones that I was seeing most often or that seemed best, but at the end, I've got a link to an article that has so many citations and things like that. So if you copy the link at the end to the article, then you'll be able to have a look at a lot of different studies that say slightly different things. What they do all agree on is that mental health conditions are much more prevalent, much higher instance in neurodivergent people. So the one that I've quoted here says as many up to 80% of autistic adults also have a comorbid mental health condition, compared to about 16% of the general population. So that's a huge, huge difference. Immediately you can see that mental health for everyone is a concern, and it's something that we should be focused on. But in the neurodivergent community, it is even more important that we look at this, because it's affecting so many, like the majority of autistic people. Almost all mental health conditions are more common in autistic people, but anxiety disorders and depression specifically are much more of an issue. ADHD and mental health. Adults with ADHD are almost 3 times more likely to experience depression than adults without ADHD, which is, again, it's quite a big difference, isn't it, if we times something by 3? So we're again seeing this huge disparity in the mental health of neurotypical people and their neurodivergent counterparts. And that's just a quote from one of the other papers that I was reading. It's often comorbid with other psychopathologies, including mood and anxiety disorders, substance use disorders, and personality disorders. Sorry, I'm just putting a wire in where it belongs. So again, we're seeing a huge amount of mental health stuff that we need to be looking at. And this slide was the most depressing one to make of everything. And I am going to try and pull it back after this, but I think it's really important that we share it and we talk about it. Because more than 60% of autistic people diagnosed as adults, so people who have gone through their childhood or a portion of their life not knowing that they were autistic, which that is a really, maybe a much bigger thing than I think we talk about often. 60% of those people have considered suicide. More than 30% of autistic adults have attempted suicide. Autistic adults without learning disabilities, and I'm only including that because the statistics were slightly different, but autistic adults without learning disabilities are 9 times more likely to die by suicide than the general population, and more than 25 times more likely to attempt suicide. And the most shocking one for me was that suicide is the second leading cause of death for autistic people. Second most likely way to die if you're autistic. So, addressing this before it gets to this point is clearly the aim. We don't want it to get to that point. We don't want to see people in those statistics. We need to be looking at mental health before we get to a crisis, at maintaining, at adjusting, at promoting good mental health before we have people committing suicide. We know from personal experience and the testimonials of the people that we work with how enormous this need is and how huge the impact can be. And I will share a couple of those later on. But that also presents its own barriers. So engaging with our mental health and with the provision can be a huge issue all on its own. And because I knew that I had to keep this to a limited time, I haven't included all of it, but there's a wealth of conversation and studies and information online about the reason that most mental health provision and interventions just don't really work for neurodivergent people. They are constructed for and aimed at neurotypical people, and it doesn't transfer across very well. So that's part of the issue. There's a lot of work to do in the medical community around that because it doesn't transfer very well. But anecdotally, what we found when we're talking to the neurodivergent people that we work with and our friendship communities is that every neurodivergent person I've ever spoken to, in all contexts, who is engaging with nature as a strategy for their mental health, they're going out, they're getting involved in nature-based activities, they're recording fungi, or they're bird watching, or whatever it is that gets you out of your house and into nature, into the woods, down to a stream, whatever it is. Every single person we've ever spoken to who is doing that for their mental health has found that it's successful to some degree or another, and quite a lot of them have told us the same as our own experience, that it's completely life-changing. And that means that it's something that we need to be focusing on. If the mainstream provision and the mainstream offerings aren't working, and yet we're hearing from so many people that there are things that are working, then we need to be doing those things that are working. The difficulty, though, is that even though we know that getting out is really good for our mental health, without a reason to do that, it can be almost impossible. So there are barriers even after we know that we found something that's really good for us. And I think some of those are probably common with some neurotypical people. It can just be hard to go out, even though you know it's good for your mental health, and we kind of feel resistant and we don't want to do it. But for neurodivergent people, when it feels like an extra demand and you've already got all of those overwhelming things on top of normal life that we were talking about, you're already overwhelmed, there's already all the sensory stuff, you're already struggling with your executive function, you have these things stacked up on top of all of the running of a daily life that everybody has, then adding doing something for your mental health to that as a thing you need to do is just too much. And that's one of the reasons that this first thing on my list here, demand avoidance, it's a common neurodivergent trait. There's a whole separate subsection of autistic people who are what's described as PDA, which is pathological demand avoidance. I don't love the title, but that's what it's called, which is just this, I can't have any other thing asked of me, not capable of doing anything that someone needs from me and need to say no. We also tend to need a reason. We need to be engaged. We need to want to go out. We need to want to do the thing. Particularly if we're ADHD, the engaging in something that you're not interested in it's like pulling teeth. It's almost impossible. Whereas when we're interested, we can do so many things. It completely shifts the amount of energy and possibility that we have. Capacity, that's the word I was looking for that thing. So that tangible purpose is really, really important. The traditional nature-based mental health offerings are often just not appealing. I originally thought this was a me thing, that distaste for things like mindfulness activities and things like that that are often offered as nature-based mental health activities. And it seems not. It seems that when we talk to other people in the community, that is quite a universal almost thing in neurodivergence, or certainly prevalent. Change is really hard, particularly for autistic people. We like routine, we like to know what's happening, we like to have things planned out and familiar. So doing something new can be a really, really challenging thing. Executive function can be a real barrier when it just comes to implementing those plans. So even if you want to go, even if you've planned to go, you've got it in your diary, you know that it's going to make you feel better, it's a really interesting subject, all of that is in place, and then you get to the door and you've forgotten your keys and your socks aren't on your feet, and so many reasons that even when we know that something's going to help, it can be really that bit more difficult. Transitions are a real sticking point, again, particularly for autistics, but for other neurodivergents too, that change from doing one thing to doing another, or from being in one place to being in another. So going from my house to the car, or going from the car to the venue. And general anxiety. I mean, I think that even from the things I've listed here, if you can imagine trying to deal with all of that at once from all those different directions, I've often described it as like having a swarm of bees in my brain. It's just constant, 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 and I can't process all of it, and then too anxious, can't function, can't cope. So knowing and understanding that there are barriers to what we're trying to achieve just helps to manage expectations, to help us be a little kinder to ourselves. And if other people understand that too, then that can be really helpful. Where are we? So yeah, for me, I probably would never have gone for walks and done anything outdoors for my mental health. I was a perfect representation of this. I need it to be interesting. I need to be engaged. I need there to be a reason to go out. It needs to be something that I want to do, not something I'm being told to do. And I discovered fungi completely by accident. I was on a walk with a friend, found some interesting mushrooms, decided I was going to take them home and try to identify what they were. I think once we started, we saw lots and lots that day, and I'd never noticed them at all before. And I think I ended up with about 20 species, managed to identify 3, and everything else went into the bin. But that 3 was enough to get a hook into my brain. And I'm a very stubborn person. This is also, I think, a trait of neurodivergence. But that was enough. It was enough, and I was hooked and I was in. And once I had that, it changed everything. That drizzly, miserable, forced walk shifted from this thing I was resistant about and didn't really want to go on, and only went because my friends wanted me to, and I wouldn't have gone otherwise. And suddenly it was curious and excited and squealing when I found something, and oh, this one's got, it was completely different. And I started to very quickly see that I felt a lot better when I was doing it than when I wasn't doing it. And that on its own has a momentum. Also found very quickly that I had a knack for it, which we'll come back to later because that's important. Meeting people who were on that same journey was huge. This is a picture of early days for me. I'm in the blue near the left there. Once I realized that this was something I was really interested in, I started to go on. This was a residential foray run by John Leach on the left there, up in Clumber. It was free, and we went and stayed in a bunkhouse, and we just did a survey for 3 days, I think, in this big park gardens. But it meant that I had this sense of community that I just hadn't. I'd always found that social stuff so difficult. Um, and and it impacted every area of my life. So that impact radiated out from just making me go out for walks to meaning that I had this social life that I hadn't had before, and that I was exercising in a way that I hadn't before. And that's a huge, huge shift. This is one of my favorite memes. This is me on every fungi foray from that first one, every time I went out looking for mushrooms. And that was not true until I started doing that. The walks in the countryside were very, very different. It's basically impacted every area of my life, and it's meant that I've met people like this and done fantastic activities and have been engaged in this enormous myco community. So now I do volunteer work identifying poisons on a international service. This was at the Fungi Festival. I give talks, I teach people, take people on forays, make videos on TikTok, all sorts of things. And it's connected me with people all over the world doing these things that have made me happier in every area of my life. And I saw this echoed over and over and over again in the experiences of neurodivergent friends and in the field mycology community as a whole. So the more and more people I met, the more of these stories I was hearing, and the more I could see that this wasn't just something that I had experienced. This was a common experience for a huge amount of people. And I see it in the walks that we lead as well. So we have people that turn up that have never done this before, and they've come because it's free or because their friends brought them or whatever. And it's like, oh, well, I suppose I like mushrooms. I like to eat mushrooms. And yeah, they're quite interesting, aren't they? You've seen the red and white ones. And by the end, it's, oh my God, if you look at it under the hand lens, it's got these hairs, and this one glows if you put a UV light on it. And the spores on this one are spiky. And it's this huge shift from people who are struggling to people who are engaged and excited and curious and animated. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing to watch. Sorry, tech again. So we have found that neurodivergent individuals often have a particular aptitude for those things that catch their interest. And we talk about it in the community. We mentioned it briefly earlier, I think, as special interests. And autistic special interests are so much more than just a hobby or a thing that we like to do. They're all encompassing and hugely impactful for the people that have them. We take these huge deep dives into a subject and want to know everything about it. We want all of the information. We're basically like little sponges, and we're waiting to be engaged. And that's how we can make that shift and impact mental health, is by engaging with those special interests. I'm really aware of the time already. There's me worrying I won't fill an hour. I've never had a problem filling time. There is actually quite a lot of evidence to show that engaging in these special interests is beneficial to autistic mental health. In the case of mycology and other similar disciplines, it also necessitates doing other things that are proven to benefit everyone's mental health. So not only are we engaging in a special interest, which has evidenced mental health impact, we're also spending time in nature, which has evidenced mental health impact. We're also doing the mindfulness thing, even though we're not doing the mindfulness thing. We're doing exercise, which can be a really difficult thing to do. It's encompassing so many things, all of which are going to be good for us, without it feeling like a huge demand. It's also a massively sensory pursuit. It's a hugely sensory thing, mycology. From smelling the mushrooms, some of them smell like aniseed, some of them smell like geraniums, some of them smell like sulfur, or this huge range, and some of them are gloopy and sticky, and some of them, I don't know, spiky, or there's a huge amount of sensory joy. Even nibble and spit tests, which we do as part of the ID process for some fungi, a hugely sensory thing. If we're going to try and identify a birch brittlegill, for example, we have to nibble these things in order to identify them, but they taste like chili, like nibbling on a raw chili. And that's a real engaging sensory impact. And it brings us joy. So to watch people experiencing all of those sensory things on a walk and getting this wholesome, neurodivergent, squeaky, jumping up and down joy, it's a huge vector for connection. It's building communities in such a short time while we're out in a way that doesn't often happen for us. Also, just tying in the ADHD community, we talk about dopamining in the ADHD community because dopamine activity and regulation is different for people with ADHD than it is for people without. So we have to and do often engage in activities specifically to give ourselves a little dopamine hit, I suppose, to get that dopamine that we're not getting in the way that other people would. And some people use computer games, some people use food or substances. There's this huge correlation between substance use issues and neurodivergence that I think this is probably part of. But anything that works like a treasure hunt has that effect. It's finding these little interesting things and it keeps giving you that same little hit that, I don't know, getting points in your computer game would. I don't play those, so. So you can see that there's this huge body of information and evidence about mental health in the neurodivergent community that doing these things in mycology, in field mycology particularly, has this effect on. But how does that tie in with field mycology as a discipline? How does it impact that? And the answer is that the benefits are two-directional. So funding for field mycology is extremely limited for that actual field work. The funding's been cut or frozen even for big organisations. There are very few paid jobs in field mycology, almost non-existent. If you get one, you are incredibly lucky, as well as probably incredibly over skilled and underpaid, but also very lucky because we all want one. Natural England, who are responsible for notifying things like triple SIs and conservation work, only commissioned 5 surveys of grassland fungi, which are the main ones that those things are notified for in the past 3 to 5 years. And they reckon, I spoke to one person very briefly because I was running behind on collecting information, but he said maybe another 3 different types of mycological surveys. Basically, mycology is hugely reliant, field mycology, on these. I mean, in America, they tend to use pro-am, these talented but amateur mycologists, because there aren't professional field mycologists, or there are very few. So we need to be bringing in new young people who are interested and have love and passion and that get something else from doing this that isn't being paid, because getting paid to do it is so unusual. And we want people out in the field. We need people out doing the identification, the microscopy, the work of learning how to use a microscope and identifying things using that microscope without being paid to do it. You have to be getting something else for it. And that is the joy that comes from that sort of learning for people with a special interest. It's a really powerful motivator. So we need to be all working together as a cohesive community to achieve that. Engagement and growth in this area is so important. So we need to be removing barriers for anyone who is interested. So making sure that it's as accessible as is humanly possible, particularly in demographics where there's talent, aptitude, and a desire to learn all this minutiae of the subject. In most fields, the idea of getting people to learn this huge breadth of information and then work on it regularly without getting paid for it sounds bonkers, but it happens all the time in field mycology because there is this two-way benefit. So there are also specific traits which mean that neurodivergents are particularly suited for this in terms of looking at it from the perspective of the field mycology discipline. So a strong tendency towards structured thinking and categorization in autistic individuals particularly. We tend to like structure and like kind of categorizing and understanding things in this very structured way. It often feels quite calming to be able to put everything in its box. Really, really useful in things like taxonomy and phylogeny, and or just learning how to identify things. We need to be able to put them in their boxes and categorize them. And I can also visualize that in my head. I don't think in images very often, but for me, it's almost like a little filing system and everything goes in its place and it makes sense. I like that. I enjoy that. So that's a really useful trait for mycology. And natural talent for pattern recognition makes finding fungi a lot easier. Like people often ask me when I'm running courses and teaching ID, how I'm seeing that, how am I finding these things? And the answer is pattern recognition. It's different from its surroundings, so I'm seeing it. Using specific features to arrive at identification is a lot easier if you're good at pattern recognition. And click, click, click things into place because that's how it fits. Repetitive behaviors are a big one. They're called RRBs, restrictive repetitive behaviors in the literature. And they're often talked about as if they're a really negative thing by the medical establishment. And I'm sure that when they conflict with the expectations that your life has of you in this neurotypical centric society, then they probably can cause distress and interfere with daily life, is how it's described. But actually, it's really calming and joyful for autistic people often to do these repetitive things. It helps us to regulate and to feel calm. And it's really very useful when you're keying things out and doing microscopy to be doing these same things over and over again, and for that to be an enjoyable, joyful part of what you're doing. Mycology works for autistic brains. I've written here in my notes, keying out on microscopy can be like a meditation retreat for someone with a special interest in fungi. I think I was feeling very waxing lyrical at the time, but it's true. If that's how your brain works, then doing those repetitive things over and over again, and then achieving something at the end of it and finding the answer, that's ticked all the boxes. Literal thinking, black and white thinking, again with keying out and things like that, it tends to be that sort of process. It's either this or it's this, it's either this or it's this. And it's really helpful to have a brain that enjoys that way of looking at things. And we're often really quite good at thinking outside the box. So that disregard for social constructs and unnecessary or illogical constrictions in how things are done can translate to this unconventional thought and seeing things in quite innovative ways. Basically, mycology and neurodivergence are a match made in heaven. So, getting there. I think I've got about 10, 15 more minutes. We'll see. How can we encourage and support this mutually beneficial connection? Now that we understand that this is helping everybody, how do we do more of it? I need a tech person. That's what I need. Next time, I'm just going to have someone to click the buttons. So we know how vital special interests are to those who have them. We've looked a little bit at that, and that aspect of our neurodivergence can be key to addressing the mental health struggles. And studies have found that for autistic adults who do have special interests, motivation for engaging in those special interests was associated with increased subjective well-being, and being specifically and inclusively welcomed is absolutely motivating. Autistics are also very open to learning. We want to learn. We're, like I said, like sponges, once we feel safe and welcome. But that is a need, that the welcome happens first. Otherwise, we can't engage with the learning. Special interests are extremely important. This is a quote from another one of the studies, extremely important in the lives of autistic adults and should be utilized to enhance their employment experiences, because that's always the focus when we're looking at these studies. I included it because it goes on to say, and overall well-being. family members, adult service providers, educational professors should support and encourage special interests. And that includes the communities of those special interests. The people that are involved in that community should absolutely be encouraging and supporting that. Another quote is, respondents without support from people in their life related to their special interest reported higher levels of stress, which absolutely rings true. If you've got no support for that one thing that's the most important thing to you, then of course you're going to be more stressed. So when we support that, when we actively look to support the neurodivergent members of our community in this sphere, in this interest, in this discipline, we're lowering their stress levels. Last quote from these is, the narratives of special interest collected in this project challenge stereotypes of autistic people as disconnected and asocial. Instead, this study demonstrated how special interests take on increased individual and societal importance for autistic people. I just thought it was quite interesting because I think autistic people are often seen as asocial or antisocial or introvert. Some of us will be. We're all different, but the truth is that I'm considered quite socially awkward in NT circles. I'm terrible at small talk. I can't chat in the way that is expected of me. And yet people who meet me in the mycological community, I say something about, oh, but I'm a bit socially awkward. And they go, no, you're not. What are you talking about? You're brilliant. You can talk all day. You're so approachable and chatty. And it's because we're talking about my special interest. That's what it is. So in situations that we find uncomfortable, autistic people and other neurodivergents often will appear to be these kind of introvert or insular or antisocial people, but will often thrive socially once they're in an environment that's associated with their special interest. That means that the social interaction and community building that's so important for all of us tends to happen in quite specific ways for autistic people, which makes those environments even more important for our mental health and well-being, because they're the only ones that we're capable and have the capacity to do those things in. So we've seen that neurodivergent traits often lend themselves to learning skills like field ID, keys, microscopy, taxonomy, and recording. But we need to learn those skills. And in order to learn those skills, we need to be invited by the established community. And when I say invited, I mean explicitly invited. I often say that I'm a bit like a vampire that way. If there's any ambiguity about whether I'm welcome in a space, in an area, in a house, anywhere, I just won't risk it. I won't go. I'll stay at home. So another reason that we are often seen as more antisocial than we are, we need that explicit, very clear communication. So just reading from the slide, because I didn't cover that, but being super explicit is really, really common. It lessens anxiety, direct communication, and making sure that we're not judgmental about where people are starting. So what brought someone to mycology is going to be different for all sorts of different people. And even if we're not enthusiastic about their background, we can remain neutral. We can avoid alienating people based on those sorts of things before they've had a chance to expand that interest. This is us teaching. At Petrichor, we're addressing this by designing and delivering courses and activities specifically for ND people and with the aim of improving mental health. The things that we know from experience have been important for us. So the things that we've learned about ourselves, we're trying to make sure that those things are accessible for other people. These courses are either deep dive educational things, supporting people to take the next steps into macromorphological identification, so identifying mushrooms in the field, microscopy, using microscopes to identify. That's a really big one because people who have already been in the community for a really long time doing fantastic field work often just haven't had that explicit invitation to get to the point of using a microscope, and they need it, and they need to know that that is for them and they will be supported. Recording, all of those sorts of things. And sometimes these courses are structured as a purposeful and engaging alternative to the mindfulness and meditative practices that some of us find difficult. We use hands-on field kit. Just looking for my slide. This is lovely. Damon gave me permission to share his photograph. One of the things that we use on our courses is origami microscopes, which is just bonkers and brilliant. And I'm so excited to tell everyone about them. So these are called fold scopes, but all sorts of other field kit as well. So we've got little microscopes that you can use slides with and do proper microscopy that you can clip onto your phone. And then we have lenses and magnifying glasses and all of those sorts of things as well. As many ways as we can possibly find for people to engage in that kind of tiny microcosm of microscopic fungi that can be so good for those mindfulness practices and really help people zone in and calm and tune out other things and get that mindfulness without having to, I don't know, roll around on the floor with your shoes off. But that slowing down, focusing in, and exploring those tiny, tiny things can be really, really impactful. We know that this is incredibly useful for people from our own experience, but also from the feedback that we're getting from other people. So this is one of the testimonials from someone called Ellie. It says, I've always loved being outside once I get there, but I often struggle to actually motivate myself out the door without a purpose, despite the fact that I know it helps calm me and aids me in managing the chaos inside my head. Ellie's a repeat customer and has been to multiple things that I've run over the years. And I absolutely resonate with that. It makes complete sense to me. This one's a little longer, but I couldn't find a way to condense it, so I'm just doing the whole thing. It's from someone called Ruth. Says, I'm neurodivergent, queer, and disabled. So many hobby communities are a bit inaccessible to people like me, but learning to spot fungi has given a whole new dimension to my time outdoors. Nobody can take in every detail, but learning how to notice more categories of details makes my environment feel much, much richer. It also gives me a purpose other than purely physical exercise to spend time outdoors, which helps with motivation to spend time outdoors when the impressive physical achievements feel out of reach. So these are real impactful ways that we're seeing people benefit from the work that we're doing. Reasonable adjustments, it's a term used mostly in employment, but it's just a useful thing to have in our heads. So the way that we change things is often invisible for autistic and neurodivergent people, but it ensures that they can participate and access on equal terms. I can see Alessandra, so I'm going to try and wrap it up. I'll give it 5 minutes. I haven't talked for an hour. I haven't, but I will try and be as speedy as possible. So we can start by just making the effort to understand how important special interests are to autistic people and the depth of exploration that they often want. Oh, everything's dropping now. There it is. Examples of how we can adjust for those people are making sure we provide information about what we're doing in advance as much as possible, making sure people have, you know, layouts of venues, information about what's happening, information about sensory stimuli. If we can mitigate it, we do. If we can't, we make sure people know about it. So noises, smells, bright lights, anything like that can be really, really important for neurodivergent people to know about. Having information available in multiple formats. If you want my notes or my slides or to ask questions afterwards, just get in touch. It's really important that we make sure things are accessible in multiple different sensory ways for different people. Either going without icebreakers or turn-taking activities or explicitly offering alternatives. You can just wave if you don't want to say your name now, it's fine. And explicitly talking about neurodivergence when we're talking about people's access needs and asking people if they have access needs. So, this is good. I've done all of this bit. Flustered now. I feel like when they're filming and you can see people doing that in the background. And the most important thing I think that we can do to make things more accessible for the neurodivergents in our community is to be as open-minded, curious, and kind as we can be. Whether it's about people's backgrounds, how they came to mycology, we often see that people come to mycology from a foraging background, because that's essentially the only way that lay people who don't come from an academic background to find fungi. And then they feel like the establishment isn't welcoming of them because they're not doing it right, and they can't then progress, they can't learn something new because they're not welcome in that environment. And if we can just, we don't have to include foraging in any of our offerings, but we do need to remain as neutral as we can and just extend that information, like invitation rather, like we were talking about earlier. If we can invite people to take that step from one to the other, it doesn't matter where they're coming from. We can just say, you're welcome in this community and you're welcome to come and learn this bit about fungi. If you're interested in that, maybe you'll be interested in this. Also just important to understand that how neurodivergent people present themselves is often going to be different, because we're less encumbered, don't care as much about societal expectations and constructs. Often we present or look or seem different. There's also this strong correlation between neurodivergence and being LGBTQ plus. Hi to the community. And RSD, I think this is the last big thing that I wanted to cover. When we come across as judgmental about how someone's come in or whether they're doing something right when they're new and they're not feeling welcome or comfortable or grounded yet, rejection sensitive dysphoria, particularly for ADHD people, is this response to perceived rejection or criticism that is much, much, much stronger. Overwhelming emotional pain is how it's described in the literature. And if we're not welcoming and kind and inviting, we can very easily alienate people and make them just not come back. Just won't happen. So that initial kindness and invitation is just super important. I think, while I've rushed through that, and I'm sure I've missed something important, we are at the summary. So that's me pretty much done. This is me attempting to take all of what I've said and put it into one very, very short sentence or two. Please do get in touch if you have questions after this question period. I know that myself as a neurodivergent, people often ask, do you have a question? And I panic and can't think of anything, no words, none whatsoever. And then 2 days later, I have this brilliant question in my brain. So do feel like you can email that over my, that's the thank yous. We can leave that on in a second. But, oh, and references, again, you can take a screenshot of that now, or I can send them over to people. But that's my email address. I'll leave that up just for a moment while we're wrapping up, and you're welcome to email things if you don't remember your question right now. Thank you, Alessandra, for being as patient as you have been. I think I have actually not talked for more than an hour.
Oh no, you're very good in keeping time. And
I'm not
doing this,
very good at keeping
and
time.
I'm sure we have what 50, 54 people applauding this. Like, this was very informative. We have lots of people in the chat saying that they feel heard. I felt seen, and
Oh,
I've also, it was a very incredible talk and made me very thought provoking, at least for me.
I'm glad. I feel like it was front heavy, so I rushed through the last bit, but I'm sure that means that questions can focus on it.
Yeah. So we have a few questions, and we can just have a chat about it if that's
Absolutely.
okay. Catherine asked, so right at your start, one of your starting slides, not starting yet, probably fifth or sixth slide, you mentioned masking. So she would love to understand what that means.
Yeah, it's one of the things I was hoping to come back to, but I needed to rush a little bit. Masking, particularly in autistics, I think it's also described as social camouflage, and there's multiple ways of describing it, but essentially, because we tend not to present to neurotypicals as they expect humans to present, we tend to learn, often by copying other people and mirroring what other people are doing and trying to rationalize and logically work out what's expected of us in certain situations and then project that. A lot of us as neurodivergents will recognize this idea of practicing conversations in our heads or in front of the mirror, practicing facial expressions when we were children, because people had said that we looked angry or we looked grumpy when we were feeling happy, and we're not sure that we're doing it right. So we'll sit there in the mirror going, if I, oh, that's the one that I'm supposed to be doing. It's and when we're children, that feels like, you're learning all the time, every day, all sorts of different things. So maybe this is normal, maybe everyone's doing this, but it's basically, so the masking is putting on a neurotypical suit
Yeah,
and trying to look normal. The issue with that is that it can be absolutely exhausting. And so if you're doing that when you're in extended periods of time, so if you're at work or at school and you're masking for a very long time every day, you're
yeah,
having to think about every single thing that you do and whether it's right and whether it fits all the time every day. And then you get home at the end and you're just not relaxed for a single
no,
second all day. So
yeah,
that's my very brief overview of what masking is, but it's particularly common in women and femme presenting autistics, but it can be seen in anyone.
yeah. She just said, thank you for explaining. Thank you for explaining to me as well. Rosie is asking, she's just wondering if there is any information on whether encouraging this special interest has any negative mental health connotations.
Not that I've
And
found. I would be willing to do that deep dive, and is it Rosie?
yeah,
Is absolutely welcome to ping me an email afterwards and we'll see. But most of what I found is that it's got positive mental health applications. I think with anything, if you get so focused on one thing that you can't get out of it. I mean, for most of us, we've been in a hyper focus at some point that has been really hard to get out of. Um, I remember when I was doing art, I once did a painting for 16 hours and forgot to eat or drink. So that's not ideal for mental health,
mm,
because physical health impacts mental health and all of that sort of thing if you're not sleeping but generally the impacts, again, if people want references, I had to speed through at the end, but I
yeah,
have
yeah,
links to studies about special interests in relation to mental health, so we can do that afterwards.
that's great. So a lot of people saying, about the whole mindfulness, and I also find a little bit it's not for me. Let's put it
No,
this way.
I once went to an activity, an outdoor nature engagement mindfulness, and the woman asked me to lie down on the floor and give thanks to Mother Gaia, and I just had to walk out. I couldn't do it. So,
Yes, it's yeah. So, uh, so Gary here is asking, we have UK Fungus Day in October, right? We'll have lots of events, but how do we encourage neurodiverse to attend them?
it's that vampire syndrome. We specifically invite neurodivergent people. Either we put on uh, events or parts of events that are specifically for or aimed at neurodivergent people, so with limited sensory impact, or we find that a lot of neurodivergent people really enjoy the nighttime walks that we do with UV torches. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's something really beautiful about having less light and it's very quiet at nighttime, and that kind of sensory deprivation, and then you hit something with a UV torch and it glows and it's bright and that can be particularly inviting for neurodivergence, but even just to include in your literature, in your advertising, we've made this as ND friendly as we can, because we know that there are a lot of neurodivergent people that are interested in coming on. I mean, word it better than that, because you'll have had more than 3 seconds to think about it. But explicit communication and explicit invitations are the way that we do that. And then considering how we make the event as friendly as possible for those people, which we did run through briefly. But again, if anyone wants to get in touch, we can send notes
Yeah,
through, because I have all of these notes just typed up.
yeah. No, that's great, because there is more people asking, how more examples of how we can engage. And I suppose you're saying go on night walks, right? So if we can go on this night walks with the UV, maybe
Yeah.
that's one way of
And I mean, if
engaging.
we're talking about how do we engage neurodivergent people,
Yeah,
we, as neurodivergent people, we go into those communities, and a lot of those communities are online because that's how we feel comfortable doing community. We go into those groups and we say, hey guys, we're doing this activity. It's great for neurodivergence because of all of these reasons. You're all welcome to it. It's free. Come along and join us. Those invites can be extended in that space
yeah,
so that the right
and
people are seeing them.
yeah. And do we have, was that, is that a, that's the question I'm asking now. So do you think, is there a place for us, even within the BMS, right, to kind of encourage or kind of have, I don't know, maybe a special day, or within UK Fungus
I think as part
for
of UK
people?
Fungus Day, we can absolutely offer specific events that are catering for neurodivergent community. And I think you'll find that they'd be really well attended.
Yeah,
My experience of, so in the online community, I have been, because I've just been doing this a really long time, I'm quite old
yeah,
now. And I admin a lot of groups. So I have been managing, moderating, being admin for big identification groups, foraging groups, all of those sorts of things for some of them like a decade. And you'll see that in some of them, the majority of people that are engaging there are neurodivergent. And when you start talking about it, they go, "Oh, that's me." And if we put word out into those communities and say, we've recognized that there are a high proportion of neurodivergent people, so we're putting on an event especially for you, or that's specifically had sensory things taken into account, or is, those sorts of things are likely to be really well received.
okay, that's fantastic. And do we, I don't think we have, I think we have a lot of people praising your talk, saying it was great, saying that they felt people comparing fungi to Pokemon, which I find
You do that a lot. I didn't put it in the talk because it's the BMS, and I'm trying to be sensible here, but not only my children, but also me and my partner have been known to compare, because you've got to catch them all.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, so I think if we don't have any more questions,
No, my experience, again, it's the sensory processing and
I know.
processing information means that they're likely to come later.
Yeah, absolutely. But is this talk is being recorded anyways?
Yeah,
Uh, hopefully people have taken your details, your email, and thank you so much, Iona. It was a pleasure to watch your talk, to hear you
I'm
speak.
glad. It
I,
felt a
I
little
hope
disjointed, but
they'll
I'm
see
hoping that
you.
most of it got done.
Yeah, yeah. Again, lots of comments. You can see that you can afterwards maybe we can see you can see the
Yeah,
comments. A lot of people saying that uh, you have you have resonated with them and with me as well.
I'm really glad. That is the whole plan and the whole point.
Yeah, so it was fantastic. Thank you everyone for watching this today. And I think with that, this probably, and I might be wrong, but it might be posted somewhere in the BMS.
It's going to be on the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Yes, I have given consent to when very
So that,
bravely gave consent to the talk I'd never
yeah.
given before being put on YouTube. So you will be able to find it on the BMS YouTube channel.
Okay. That's great. That was fascinating, really fascinating talk. I felt seen as well. Okay, so thank you everyone for today. Thank you again, Iona, for a brilliant presentation.
So welcome, and thank you to everyone for coming.
Hope to see you again next time on this talks. Okay,
Bye.
bye. Thank you.